May 1945. The gargantuan machinery of the Second World War finally ground to a halt. But for the people of Europe and Asia, the end of the fighting didn't bring the golden age of peace they had dreamed of in the trenches. Instead, it brought a terrifying, hollow silence. Across the globe, 60 million people were gone, evaporated into the ash of crematoriums or buried in the frozen mud of distant fronts. Walk through the streets of Berlin or Warsaw in the summer of 1945, and you wouldn't see cities. You would see canyons of jagged brick and twisted rebar. This was year zero. The social architecture of centuries had been pulverized. There were no functioning banks, no schools, no police, and most importantly, no food. Millions of displaced persons, human flotsam from the Nazi death camps and slave labor factories, wandered like ghosts across a continent that no longer had a place for them. In the ruins of Tokyo, people lived in shacks made of rusted corrugated iron, scavenging for any scrap of protein. As the old colonial powers, Britain and France, sat bankrupt amidst their victory medals, two wounded titans loomed over the wreckage. The United States, with its industry untouched by bombs and its pockets full of gold, and the Soviet Union, a scarred colossus that had paid for victory with 27 million lives. They were allies by the sheer gravity of a common enemy. But as the shadow of Hitler faded, a new, colder shadow began to stretch across the map. The vacuum of power was begging to be filled, and the blueprints for the new world were being drawn in two very different colors, red and blue. The Cold War wasn't born on a battlefield. It was born in smoky rooms over glasses of whiskey and vodka. At the Yalta Conference in February 1945, the Big Three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, sat together for the last time. Roosevelt was a dying man, Churchill was desperate to save a crumbling empire, and Stalin was a master of the long game. They spoke of self-determination for liberated nations, but their pens were busy carving up the globe like a Thanksgiving turkey. Stalin's logic was carved from the trauma of history. Russia had been invaded from the West twice in 30 years. He was determined to build a glacis, a defensive slope of satellite states that would bleed any future invader dry before they reached Moscow. For him, Poland wasn't a nation, it was a corridor. While the West dreamed of a democratic world order, Stalin was installing his little Stalins in every capital the Red Army occupied. The promised free elections were replaced by the salami tactics of the secret police, slicing away the opposition bit by bit until only the communists remained. By 1946, the honeymoon was over. In Washington, a growing sense of dread was taking root. The Soviet Union wasn't withdrawing, it was digging in. In Moscow, a young, brilliant American diplomat named George Kennan sat at his desk and typed the long telegram. At 8,000 words, it was a masterpiece of geopolitical analysis. He argued that the Soviets were driven by a deep-seated insecurity and could only be dealt with through long-term, patient but firm and vigilant containment. But the public didn't understand the danger until a retired lion spoke. In March 1946, Winston Churchill stood in a small gymnasium in Fulton, Missouri. As President Truman sat behind him, Churchill's voice, raspy but commanding, echoed through the hall. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. It was a shocking image, a literal wall of steel and ideology severing Europe in two. The West was horrified. The world they had fought to unify was now being amputated. Churchill wasn't just making a speech. He was declaring the start of a new, bloodless war. By 1947, victory had a bitter, metallic taste. Europe was not just broken, it was starving. The winter of that year was the harshest in living memory, the hunger winter. In the ruins of Vienna and Paris, families burned their furniture to stay warm, and the only thriving industry was the black market. This misery was the perfect laboratory for communism. From the slums of Rome to the factories of France, desperate people began to look toward the Red Star of Moscow for bread and hope. Washington realized a terrifying truth. If Europe's stomach remained empty, its heart would turn red. In June 1947, Secretary of State George C. Marshall stood at Harvard University. He didn't offer a military alliance, he offered a checkbook. The Marshall Plan was a project of unprecedented scale, over $13 billion, more than $150 billion in today's money. It was a grand design to rebuild the very architecture of Western civilization. But it wasn't just charity, it was a strategic weapon. To receive the aid, nations had to open their ledgers and cooperate. It was an invitation to join a capitalist future, a golden lifeline that Stalin immediately recognized as a threat to his grip on the East. Stalin's reaction was swift and brutal. He forbade his satellite states from accepting a single American cent. He saw the Marshall Plan not as a lifeline, but as a Trojan horse designed to lure Eastern Europe into the American orbit. To counter this, he created Comecon, tying the economies of the East to Moscow's iron will. The world was no longer just divided by soldiers. It was now split by two competing economic dreams. You either took Washington's dollar and its democracy, or you took Moscow's bread and its chains. By 1948, Berlin had become a geographic scar. Divided into four sectors, the city sat 100 miles deep inside the Soviet-controlled territory of East Germany. It was a Western outpost in a communist ocean. When the Western Allies introduced a new stable currency, the Deutsche Mark, Stalin saw a direct challenge to his authority. On June 24, 1948, he struck. He cut off all land and water routes into West Berlin. No trains, no trucks, no barges. He intended to starve 2 million people into submission, betting that the West wouldn't risk a Third World War for half a city. But Stalin underestimated the sheer logistical will of the West. Operation Vittles was launched, a plan so audacious it seemed impossible. The Allies decided to supply an entire metropolis solely by air. For 324 days, the sky over Berlin was never silent. At the height of the airlift, a plane landed at Tempelhof Airport every 45 seconds, day and night. Pilots flew through fog, ice, and Soviet harassment, carrying everything from dehydrated potatoes to thousands of tons of coal to keep the city from freezing. Berliners, once enemies, watched the sky not for bombers, but for the raisin bombers that brought life. Among the heroes was a young pilot named Gail Halvorson. He began dropping tiny handmade parachutes filled with chocolate and chewing gum for the children waiting at the edge of the runways. These candy bombers transformed the image of the American soldier from a conqueror to a protector. In May 1949, realizing the blockade had only unified the West and humiliated the Soviet Union, Stalin finally blinked and lifted the barriers. West Berlin had survived, becoming a shining, neon-lit symbol of resistance against the darkness of tyranny. While the eyes of the world were locked on the drama of Berlin and the recovery of Europe, a seismic shift was occurring in the East, one that would permanently alter the global balance of power. In 1949, the long, bloody Chinese Civil War reached its staggering climax. Mao Zedong's peasant armies swept across the mainland, driving the nationalist forces of Chiang Kai-shek into a desperate retreat to the island of Taiwan. On October 1st, from the ancient gate of heavenly peace, Mao proclaimed the birth of the People's Republic of China. For Washington, this was the great nightmare. A quarter of the human race had just joined the communist bloc. The Cold War was no longer a European dispute. It had become a global struggle for the soul of humanity. But the shock of losing China was soon followed by a far more terrifying revelation. For 4 years, the United States had slept soundly under the exclusive protection of the atomic bomb, believing its nuclear secret was safe for at least a decade. That illusion vanished on August 29, 1949. Over the remote, desolate steppes of Kazakhstan, a blinding flash tore through the sky, followed by the rising pillar of a mushroom cloud. The Soviet Union had detonated its first atomic device, nicknamed First Lightning. The American monopoly was over. The era of mad, mutually assured destruction had begun. From now on, any direct conflict between the two giants didn't just mean defeat, it meant the extinction of civilization itself. By 1950, the world was a powder keg, and the fuse was burning rapidly in a small mountainous peninsula in Asia, Korea. Divided at the 38th parallel by a hurried line drawn on a map in 1945, the country had become the ultimate laboratory of the Cold War. In the north, a Soviet-backed regime led by Kim Il-sung hungered for unification by force. In the south, a fragile US-backed government stood guarded by a thin line of weary troops. Stalin, emboldened by his new atomic shield, and Mao's victory in China, finally gave the fateful nod to the north. The fragile peace of the last 5 years was about to shatter into 1,000 bloody pieces. The 5 years between 1945 and 1950 did more than just remake the map. They redesigned the human psyche. We moved from a world of open battlefield to a world of shadows, spies, and the constant, low-frequency hum of nuclear anxiety. As the first North Korean tanks crossed the border on a rainy June morning in 1950, the Cold War finally turned hot. The forgotten war was about to begin, and with it, a struggle that would define the lives of millions for generations to come. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the world held its breath as the first shots of a new kind of tragedy were fired.